Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session Optimizing DevSecOps Secure Solutions for Fast Delivery. I'm Reenal Vikaria, and I'll be your host for today. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen only mode and will last for an hour, out of which last 15 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. Now about our speaker, Sean D. Mack. Sean D. Mack is a transformational technology leader, author, speaker, and former CIO and CISO at Ville. He is the author of the DevSecOps Playbook and a CIO 100 Award recipient. Sean is a visionary technology executive with extensive experience leading DevOps, infrastructure, enterprise applications, security, desktop services. Sean has led global teams across a wide range of companies, from financial firms like Experian to innovative tech companies like Etsy. So, without any further delay, I would now hand over the session to you, Sean.
Great, thank you very much, and welcome everyone to EC Council Cyber Talk, how to deliver securely without sacrificing speed. Cybersecurity is arguably one of the most pressing threats for businesses today, and yet for many companies, it remains an afterthought. According to Cyber News, cybercrime is now an $8 trillion industry. So to put this into perspective, that rivals the gross domestic product for most countries in the world, behind only the US and China. So if cyber crime were a nation state, it would be the third largest in the world by gross domestic product. Now, DevOps has fundamentally changed the way we deliver software products, and we can see some amazing results if we apply the principles of DevOps to cybersecurity. Now, before I start, I'd like to introduce myself, but first I'd like to learn a little bit more about you. So we'll be launching a survey here, and I'd love to hear about where you are on your journey, just so I can know and position this talk correctly going forward. Love to hear if you're new to DevOps and cybersecurity, engineer, a practitioner, a manager, or a senior lead or executive, or if you're none of the above. So if you could take a minute to fill out that survey, which we'll be launching now, that would be great. While you do that, I'll introduce myself. I'm Sean D. Mack. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a transformational technology leader and author of the DevSecOps Playbook. Also a fractional CIO, CTO, and CISO, and former CIO and CISO of Wiley. Prior to Wiley, I led a global DevOps consultancy called XOps, where I led transformations in DevOps and cybersecurity for companies around the world. Right, and hopefully we'll be seeing the results of those that poll in just a minute. Meanwhile, in this talk, I'm going to look at the principles of DevOps and how they can be used to deliver secure products to the market without sacrificing speed. I'm going to start with some background and talk about the evolution of the cyber threat landscape. Then I'll talk about how you can integrate DevOps principles into security. I'm going to talk a little bit about DevOps tools, and then I'll get into driving transformation, tips for successfully driving a DevSecOps transformation, as well as some of the pitfalls you need to be aware of. Finally, I'm going to leave you with some first steps you can take along your DevSecOps journey. Now, my hope is that you'll learn something today from what I speak about. I find these talks to be most useful when they provide ideas that make a practical impact on how we work from day to day. So through the course of the talk, I'd like you to think about this. What is the one thing you're going to take away? What is the one thing you're going to do differently tomorrow based on what you hear here today? We've got the results of those fears. It looks like a lot of folks here are new to DevOps and cybersecurity, or at the engineer practitioner level. So that's great. A lot of what I talk about will be very relevant to you, and I'll try and focus a little more on some of those areas that might be most impactful. But I want to start in the beginning, and that's by really understanding the evolution of the threat landscape and the attack surface. Because both the threat landscape and the attack surface have evolved massively over the past 10 to 15 years, and our responses need to change too. But in order to really understand how our responses evolve, we need to start by understanding how the threat actors and the attack surface have evolved. One of the most impactful changes to attack surface, that is the area in which a threat actor may launch their attacks against, has been an evolution of infrastructure. This has happened over the last 10 to 20 years. But what we've seen is really this expansion and what I think of as a devolution of the perimeter. We've moved from self-contained institutions where the data center was co-located within the company headquarters to vastly more expansive footprints of data and technology. We've seen the separation of the data center and then the move to multiple data centers. We've seen the move to cloud providers to the point where most large companies today are actually now dependent on multiple cloud providers, multiple data centers. We've also seen the rise of software as a service, right? Whether it be ServiceNow or Salesforce, more and more companies are depending on SaaS providers and multiple SaaS providers. And the pandemic only accelerated these trends, increasing the reliance on SaaS providers, increasing the pace of the move to cloud solutions, right? In addition, during the pandemic, we saw this vast migration of people working remotely, meaning that not only does the perimeter expand, now it expands to individual employees' homes. And this devolution of the perimeter means that perimeter-based security is simply no longer an option. Now, at the same time we've seen this devolution of the perimeter, we've also seen an evolution of application delivery, right? And this vast increase in the pace at which applications are delivered to the market. As we move from CD to CI/CD, companies have moved from releasing once a quarter, once a year, to once a second, to the point where companies are now releasing tens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of times every day. And this means we need to build security into the way we build software. Now, as the attack surface has changed, so too has the threat landscape. We've seen what I like to think of as both a widening and a deepening of the threat landscape. And what I mean by this when I say a widening is that as the amount of money involved in cybercrime has increased, there's been an increasing number of tools and services available to anyone out there. And as these tools and services become available, it's become easier for an increasing number of threat actors to be involved in cybercrime. At the same time, we've seen a deepening where this payout has increased, and that means that bigger and more advanced organizations are involved in cybercrime now, where we've seen, nation states and syndicated crime organizations committing cybercrime. So these organizations, we have to understand, are now much more like a well-organized US-based corporation with multi-levels of managers, KPIs, results driven, than they are like the hoodied hacker sitting in his grandmother's basement of yesteryear. The other thing I'll say about the threat landscape is that I've spent a lot of time over the past year talking to cybersecurity executives and listening to what their challenges are. And what I've heard is a real increase in third-party risk, increase in ransomware, and now a rise in AI threats. So as we think about this changing the solutions, we have to understand that that is the changing attack surface and what we need to defend. Now, there has been some movement in the way in which we protect against these attacks, right? And there's a few frameworks or approaches that have come up to address this. Zero trust is one that we've seen increasingly, and zero trust provides a new approach to security, which is based around the idea that organizations should never automatically assume a trusted relationship and should always require verification. Right, so this speaks directly to the idea of the devolution of the perimeter. We can no longer trust our perimeter to protect our infrastructure. We need to assume that the bad guys are within our perimeter. And once you assume that, it means you need to verify at every step, even for folks who are in the perimeter. The other thing we've seen is a rise of defense in depth. And defense in depth looks at defense at every layer of your infrastructure and ecosystem, from data security to application security to endpoint security to network security to perimeter security. And each of those, all the things you can do to protect each of those areas. Again, speaking to this lack of perimeter-based security, we need to secure within the perimeter. And this extends, of course, to your governance and your operations capability. And now, we have DevSecOps. I'm going to spend the rest of this presentation talking about DevSecOps, what it means and what you can do to implement it. But first, I'd like to understand where you are on your DevSecOps journey. So we're going to have another poll where you can share where you are. And if that's, Sean, I don't know what you mean by DevSecOps, that's fine, because we're all here to learn. But if you could please take a minute, just fill out this poll. Let me know if you haven't started, no plans to do so. If you've started implementing, but just in the early stages. If you're intermediate, if you're somewhat mature, you've made some progress, or if you're advanced and you've fully embraced DevSecOps, or if it's simply not applicable to you or your organization. While you're filling that in, I'm going to start with the basics, right? Let's talk about what is DevSecOps. Right? Fundamentally, it's about applying the principles of DevOps to cybersecurity. Okay, but then we need to understand what is DevOps. My definition of DevOps is that DevOps is a set of principles for delivering value to customer based on lean principles and collaboration. Now, I should note, let's see if we have the results from those that survey yet. It looks like we did. Okay, so a large majority of the group here have not started their DevOps implementation yet. That's great. This should give you some implementation, some advice to get going and hopefully be right on target for the almost 50% of you who haven't started yet. With 7% being advanced, that's great to see that we are seeing more advanced practitioners and that people are getting there. So there is a path forward. The stuff I'm not talking about is not all theoretical. People are getting there, so it's great to see that too. I do want to note as we talk about the DevOps in general is that DevOps has always included security. If you look at some of the earlier texts about DevOps, whether it's DevOps Handbook, the Phoenix Project, they all include chapters on security, information about building security in. But by and large, when I talk to DevOps teams, no one mentions security, right? So there's this old trope that no, it should really be DevProd, BizProd, DevSecOps or whatever, right? Because DevOps has always meant to be inclusive, but of course I'm glad it wasn't, because I'm sure it wouldn't have caught on as well if it was that difficult to say. But the point is that it's always included security, but I think it's also important to talk about DevSecOps because it really puts that emphasis there and helps us focus on the need to insert security into our DevOps or DevOps into our security. Now, there's a couple of main models for understanding DevOps. DevOps is pretty mature at this point. It's been around about 15 years. And there's a couple of common models. The first is COMS, which looks at culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing. The other common framework we hear about are the 3 ways, which were introduced in the Phoenix Project by Gene Kim, Kevin Baer, and George Spafford. And the 3 ways looks at, the first way being flow from left to right of the entire system, kind of breaking down silos. The second way about creating left to right feedback and amplifying those feedback loops. And then the third way about creating a culture that fosters continuous experimentation, risk-taking, and learning from failure. So we have to think about how do we take these concepts and insert them into cybersecurity. Well, what I'd say here is start with collaboration. Let's understand that collaboration is at the core here. Right, so very often when I'm thinking about how do we do DevSecOps, I'm starting by thinking, how do we do this in a more collaborative way, which drives better security? And by and large, working across teams is much better, and it's going to yield much better results, right? And we also need to look at how to insert these other principles of DevOps like trust, transparency, psychological safety, learning culture into cybersecurity. So I encourage anyone who's in the cybersecurity field to really think about how do we use these concepts to improve cybersecurity. Now, I will say that for many in cybersecurity, this may be somewhat counterintuitive. Right? Most people, especially people who have been in cybersecurity for a long time, have focused on risk avoidance, and often that's done by, limiting visibility, right? By not trusting. So, it is a change in mindset, and we need to consider that when we're making this, right? And let me also clarify that I'm not advocating absolute trust. Certainly someone walks in off the street and says, hey, can I go into your data center and mess around with your servers, right? Can I have the keys to your AWS instances, right? And say, oh, I trust everybody, sure, let's go, right? Obviously, there's a balance here. But what I am saying is that if we can make a shift towards trust and collaboration, it's going to result in better cybersecurity. And in fact, with the changing threat landscape and changing pace of delivery, it's the only option we have. Now, I'm going to talk about a couple concepts of principles of DevSecOps in a little bit more detail. The first is shift left, right? And shift left is fundamentally about doing tasks earlier in the development process. And this isn't a new concept. It was first introduced around quality assurance, but of course, security is a quality metric, right? So when we think about shift left, understand that this goes back over 20 years. In fact, there was a national study from the National Institute of Standards of Technology, NIST, all the way back in 2002. The study was titled The Economic Impacts of Inadequate Infrastructure for Software Testing. And it showed that the cost of fixing defects grew by 30 times when it was done in the later stages of development. And of course, that same concept, that same impact applies to security. Now, I should note here that shifting left is not just taking the tasks that were done at the end of development and putting them at the beginning. It's actually about doing things as early as possible, which may mean taking smaller components and moving them to the left, right? Obviously, we can't test the full system until the full system is built, but we can test individual lines of code. Dave Stanky, a friend and developer relations engineer at Google, coined this term smearing left, which I think is a very apt way to think about this. We're pulling the work left as far as we can with the understanding that some will still need to stay to the right. One of the reasons I start with shift left is because one of the reasons it's so important is because it fundamentally underpins one of the core concepts of DevSecOps, and that is that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. And we need to create this culture where everyone's responsible for cybersecurity. So, when we launch this poll at the beginning to see where you are in your journey, whether you're an engineer or an executive, you need to be part of this cybersecurity journey. Now, I realize it's not sufficient to say, hey, everyone's responsible for cybersecurity now, because that diffusion of responsibility can lead to a situation where no one takes ownership or accountability. And one of the ways I've found very useful to strike that balance between distributing responsibility and making sure that everybody's accountable and knows what they're doing is using a RACI model. Now, this is a method that's gone back a very long time, but you look at all the tasks in a given process, and then you look at who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed, with only one person being accountable for any given step in a process. So if we look at, say, security incident response, right? We can look at, okay, who's responsible for monitoring alerts? Who's responsible for responding to alerts? Who's responsible for updating a system in response to a potential vulnerability? And you look at each of those and you say who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. You can build a model, and if you do this with the idea of collaboration in mind, you can build a model in which responsibilities and actions are distributed without a loss of accountability, without a loss of knowing who is doing each individual step. So having looked at DevSecOps culture and process, I also want to look a little bit at DevSecOps tools. Now, I think we need to get a little bit beyond the marketing and talk about what is a DevSecOps tool. Well, I would posit that the reality is there's no such thing as a DevSecOps tool. Rather, there's a set of tools that enable DevSecOps. Now, that may seem like a bit of a pedantic differentiation, but it's really important because no tool is inherently DevSecOps. I've seen tools that are based around fostering collaboration used in ways that actually hamper collaboration within organizations. So it's much more about how you use the tools, how you apply them, and the culture of a company than the tool itself. And if we think of DevSecOps as a culture of collaboration, then we need to consider the set of tools that enables collaboration, as well as other principles like rapid feedback, continuous learning, and small batch delivery. Now, of course, tool chains and release pipelines are one of the most powerful places to look at tools within DevSecOps because it's fundamentally about building security into the product, right? So we can look at each stage of the deployment pipeline and look at how do we build security in, right? So we look at things like using static application security testing, SAST, into the commit stage so that there's immediate feedback if there's a problem, right? We can look at software composition that identifies open source dependencies in the build stage, as well as, infrastructure as code scanning if we're building our infrastructure as well. And that way, not only is the application secure when you launch, but so is the infrastructure. And then, of course, at the test stage, you can look at dynamic application security testing. Now, it's interesting. There was actually activity at the latest Enterprise DevOps Summit or Enterprise Technology Summit, and they looked at they broke out into different groups, and they each looked at all the security tools, and they looked at where in the pipeline they should be inserted. And interestingly, each group came up with a very different approach. So what I'll say here, this is not to be prescriptive. You can put these tools in the different places. What's important is that you do start to build the security into your deployment pipeline. And in fact, you can go before the pipeline by making sure you have security built into your IDE, right? That's where you get that really shift left. That's where you build security and get rapid feedback to the developer. And if they're coding a form, they can get rapid feedback that they may have just exposed themselves to the SQL injection, and they need to do some validation on that input, right? And that's about as far left as you can shift. And of course, there's also a lot we can do in terms of observability and automation in the post-build or operational phase too, right? We can look at all sorts of observability, most obvious is security incident and event management systems, which bring all of the security data together, presented in one place, right? To SOAR tools, which automate the responses to that. We can also look at chaos testing, security chaos testing, by inserting vulnerabilities into production, making sure your systems automatically catch that, and even better, automatically remediate. Now, this isn't I don't want to take up too much time here. I don't want to categorize every single type of security tool, but I do want to help us think about how we use these tools to enable the core DevSecOps principles, such as small batch delivery, transparency, and automation. More than that, we need to think about how do we fundamentally build security into our applications and services. Now, having said that, I want to shift to talk a bit about driving this transformation, because it's much more than the tools. It's about a cultural shift, and driving that shift, driving that transformation is critical. So here are some things that, some tips I'd like to give you as you drive your DevSecOps transformation. And I think these are important to consider whether you're an engineer or an executive. First and foremost, begin with the end in mind. Right? Understand why you're doing this transformation, the DevSecOps transformation, because it's the latest buzzword. Don't do a DevSecOps transformation because Sean said do a DevSecOps transformation, right? Do it to achieve business results. And that gets me to my second point, which is measure progress. Understand that end, understand where you're going with enough detail and specificity that you can actually quantify it in a measurable way. So if you're doing DevSecOps to move faster and more secure, maybe you're looking at velocity as measured by time a story is created in your Jira board to the time that is pushed to production, right? Maybe you're looking at security and you want to look at the number of vulnerabilities, or maybe even better, you want to look at the number of security incidents, right? Whatever it is, define what that end is in a measurable way so that you can see progress towards those goals. I'd also say start small and find early wins. Start with one team, and when they succeed, they can be an exemplar. You can post stories about them, and they can help other teams through that transformation as well. And then I also, and I mentioned this a little bit, but focus on that cultural transformation. All too often as technology folks, we think we built a great tool, everyone should just jump on it now, right? Or we built a great pipeline, everybody should be using it. But if we don't focus on that cultural transition, that change in the way we act, we'll never be really doing DevSecOps. And around that, we need to understand and build a communication campaign. And I also urge you to think about this as a marketing campaign, right? We can't simply send out an email and say, hey, everybody, we built this new set of tools, insert it into the pipeline, everybody jump on it, and expect them to actually shift, right? We need to build a communication campaign. Apple doesn't launch a new product and say, hey, I send you guys an email, why aren't you buying our new product yet, right? They have billboards, they have ads that come up, they have search engine optimization, they have, placement in movies, they have everything in between because they know they need to get that message out there again and again and again. And when we're driving transformation, we need to think about that same approach too. And finally, I'd say leverage outside help. All too often, I've seen companies that are struggling and they say, hey, we're struggling, we need to do massive transformation. And they take those same teams that are already struggling just to keep up with the work they have, and they put a bunch of transformation work on top of them too, right? And that's a sure recipe for failure. We have to enable teams by bringing in help to get them through the transformation. There's often a large hump of work at the beginning of a transformation, and it's often very beneficial to bring in some outside help to get over that. Now, I will say that ultimately transformation, especially cultural transformation, needs to be an internal job, right? So no one can transform for you. So if you do leverage help, that help needs to also help the people in the company to transform, right? To provide that knowledge so they can get in, get it started, and then get out and let the company continue on with that DevSecOps transformation, continue to transform and be in a more mature DevSecOps place with existing resources. Now, I've led a lot of transformations across different companies, and I've seen some amazing successes, but I've also seen some failures, right? And I've learned a lot from those. And so I want to also talk about some of the transformational challenges. One of the biggest ones is cultural inertia, right? When things that are still tend to stay still, right? Tend to not move. I worked with one company and they brought us in for a DevSecOps transformation, and we dug in, we found out about their environment, and one of the interesting findings was that they had a QA team and a dev team that were in completely different locations, weren't working together, had completely separate queues within Jira, were doing the dev work, throwing it over. Not only that, but they were located across the world from each other. They had 1 hour of overlap, so they talked maybe for half an hour a day and then worked in their own silos. And we kind of said, hey, look, you know, not only are you not doing DevOps, you're not doing DevSecOps, you're not even doing Agile, right? And until you get these teams working together, and let me say that is possible in a geographically distributed environment, but unless they're really working together, you're not going to get very far on your DevSecOps journey, right? And they said, no, we've got these contracts we're stuck in, we can't change that, right? If that sort of cultural inertia is there, it's going to be very hard to fundamentally change the company. You'll also need to have continued leadership support, as well as contributor buy-in, right? You need to have the people who are doing the work. These are the most important people in the company, the most important people in your transformation. They need to be on board. And I'll note that not everyone is going to be on board, and that's okay. But you do need a critical mass of people, right, to motivate. And you need that support both from the top and the bottom to be sustained, right? And that sustained support may require internal resources. One of the smartest decisions we made for our DevOps challenge or DevOps transformation at Wiley was to bring in a DevOps coach. And that DevOps coach really helped drive that sustained inertia. Look, a lot of organizations have got used to this idea of having an agile coach, but I've seen very few which have embraced the idea of a DevOps coach or a DevSecOps coach. And I think we need to really insert that role if we're going to be successful in driving transformation. And the last challenge I've seen is the failure to communicate value, right? And we need to understand that that value is different to different stakeholders, right? The value of DevSecOps transformation to your board of directors, to your senior executives, is going to be much better or much different than the value of that to an individual contributor. So as I wrap up, I'd like to talk about some first steps. First of all, answer why. I mentioned this earlier, but I want you to think about why you're doing DevSecOps and how you're going to measure it. Now, I note here to be wary of the perfect data trap. All too often I've seen, oh, we can't measure that because we don't have that data for our cloud environment, right? Or that data is not accurate, I don't trust it. But I'll tell you what, it's only when we start using the data that it gets better, right? So start using it, even if it's not perfect. If people are saying, arguing with it, great, that's good. They're engaged with the data. They're engaged with driving towards the mission, correct, and that will drive better data because they'll be invested in correcting the data, right? Also start small, find a team, implement one tool in one pipeline. Take that first step because every great journey begins with one small step. So as we wrap up, I'll leave you with two ideas. So the first is this idea of paved roads and bridges, because the speed of delivery and the proliferation of threats today presents this exponential increase in cybersecurity challenges. And DevSecOps provides a new model to help us address this evolving security landscape. And by integrating security into our deployment pipelines, we can ensure that the applications we're delivering meet the security requirements that our customers demand. Not only that, but DevSecOps allows us to do so without delaying delivery to our customers. So paved roads and bridges is a way of thinking about making things secure by paving the road and making being secure the easiest path. And if we can do that, more and more people will be more and more secure. But we also need to provide guardrails, because guardrails can help you go securely at scale. It's no longer about security being a gate, but it's about security being a guide. We need to help our teams go faster while keeping them safe. In fact, knowing that we keep them safe, we're able to drive faster. Ultimately, DevSecOps allows us to deliver secure products to the market while outpacing our competition. Thank you very much. I hope this was useful to you. I hope this provided some insight. I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me at Sean D. Mack at NY or Sean D. Mack NYC. I'm also on Threads and love to discuss DevSecOps there. And if you're interested in learning more, check out my book, The DevSecOps Playbook. It's on Amazon. You can get it with this QR code here. Thank you very much. I hope this was useful to you, and I wish you the best of luck on your DevSecOps journey.
Thank you very much, Sean, for delivering such an insightful and informative session. We found the webinar very engaging and hope it was valuable for you as well.
Thank you, Renal.
So before we begin with the Q&A, I would like to inform all the attendees that this session is in sync with EC Council's CDE program. EC Council's CDE is Certified DevSecOps Engineer. Over 850,000 DevSecOps engineer positions are listed on LinkedIn as of June 2022. The average annual salary for a DevSecOps engineer in the United States is USD 1,17,922. Even entry-level positions pay around USD 1,08,000, and workers with over 15 years of experience make more than USD 1,36,000. If you are interested in learning more, please participate in the poll that's going to be conducted now. Let us know your preferred mode of training and we will reach out to you. So, Sean, should we start with the question and answers?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so our first question to you is, given the growing security concerns with supply chain and third-party risk, should DevSecOps somehow be extended to external partners?
Yeah, so first of all, great question. One of the biggest threats today, third-party risk supply chain. We've seen some massive issues and just an emphasis of the impact that increased reliance on third parties can have on this, whether this be the attack against or the breach on SolarWinds, which which impacted everybody using this service, whether it be the Log4j breach, right, which impacted hundreds of thousands of customers around the world. These all are massive issues. Now, of course, to directly answer the question, DevSecOps should be used by all of these companies, right? And hopefully, if they are really applying DevSecOps if all of our partners are applying DevSecOps at a high level, they're going to have a much greater chance of catching these issues, right? I think the interesting part of this, which I'll pose and probably not have an answer to, is how do we leverage better automation to ensure that our partners and those we rely on are secure as well. So certainly part of that solution can rely on software bill of materials and software composition analysis, where we can really use those tools and build those into our pipelines to ensure any code we're bringing in is secure, right, or it meets the risk tolerance of our organization. But that doesn't address a company within their own walls getting breached, right? And so I do think that there needs to be more automation in the way we continuously verify our vendor and supplier landscape, and that there's some real opportunities there. I haven't seen a ton of great solutions, but there's certainly movement in providing more real-time, more automated vendor assessments, so we can also not only ensure the software we're building internally is secure, but ensure our vendors are secure in a way that isn't just kind of survey-based, as many third-party risk assessment processes are today.
Thank you for answering that, Sean. Next question for you is, what are some industry best practices for security monitoring using DevSecOps?
So, I think we go back to the principles here, right? And look at collaboration, right? At the core, collaboration. And so when we answer this question, we should think about how do we make that more of a collaboration between teams. And so one thing I'd highlight, especially in mid to large size organizations, is to get away from this model where it's just the operations team, it's their sole responsibility to keep things up and running, right? And so some of the best ways we've done this is by ensuring that the teams building the products have a shared responsibility in monitoring and responding to problems with the applications they're building, right? And so that doesn't mean we don't have a network operations center, we don't have a security operations center, but it does mean that the teams that build the products are aware of the major alerts and responding to them at the same time that our security operations is, and hopefully working in conjunction with them to resolve the efforts. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Obviously, a lot of opportunities in observability, right? One of the core principles. And I think one of the biggest struggles is using these tools to bring all the data together to provide a single holistic picture. And then we've got to look at the concept of automation, right? And how do we leverage automation to not only monitor, but respond to these issues? How do we make sure that the data we're getting is actionable and acted upon? And if we can automate it, we can reduce a lot of the toil, the day-to-day churn of frontline engineers, allowing them to focus on more value-driven work rather than just doing the same thing again and again and again. So can we automate patch delivery when there's identified a hole or vulnerability? So look at those concepts and try and apply them to monitoring and operational management. And I think that will give you a good start into applying the principles of DevSecOps to cybersecurity.
Thank you for answering that, Sean. And next question for you is, what are some open source security monitoring solutions that also addresses security alerting?
So yeah. So I would say there's probably too many to even get into here, and most of them are gonna involve alerting. I will say I haven't used any open source alerting platforms, so I can't personally just alerting platforms. I've used a lot of open source monitoring platforms, which include alerting. And I think you'll find that most do. So I would actually turn the question over a little bit and start by really examining what your needs are, right? Do you need a monitoring platform or alerting platform, a standalone alerting platform, and then look at what's available there? Or do you need to monitor a specific thing and then find that specific monitoring in an open source option? And most probably it will have an alerting component.
Thank you for answering that. Our next question is, what is the duration to set up a secure platform to get into the study of execution?
To set up a secure platform, it's really going to depend. It's really going to depend on the size and maturity of your organization. It also depends on how in that statement you're defining platform, right? Look, if you're a startup, you build in a secure way from the get-go. You build security into your pipeline, you're secure day one. Well, let me not oversell that. Security, I should say, security is always great, right? And you're never 100% secure, right? But if you're doing everything right, if you've got a greenfield approach, if you've got one product you're building, you can be as secure as you want from day one by building a proper DevSecOps pipeline, by building infrastructure, using infrastructure as code and testing your infrastructure as well. Then you're not only securing your application, but securing your infrastructure. Taking these principles, you can be secure from day one. If in the case of my work at Wiley, you're a 200-year-old company with technology that's only slightly younger than that. Just kidding, but with a lot of legacy technology, all different types of a very heterogeneous technology stack, getting all the teams and all the platforms to leverage DevSecOps, to leverage the tools, to leverage the technology and concepts is obviously going to take a lot longer. And it's in these enterprise environments you really need to think about a lot of the tools I spoke about today.
Thank you, Sean. Our next question for you is, what are the direct impacts of AI in DevSecOps security?
That's a good one. So I think we have to think about both. So it took us almost to the end of the presentation to get into AI, but it had to come up at some point. I think when we're looking at AI, and I've been doing some writing on the subject, you need to think about the impact on the attackers and the impact on the defense, right? And it's so broad that the impacts are pretty vast, right? I'll say I've talked to, again, a lot of people, and the most obvious impact that people are seeing today is just on the LLM functionality and the use to craft better phishing emails, the use to even generate video, and now move to video phishing or audio phishing, where you can replicate a CEO's voice. A lot of that, and I think part of that is also that's just the more visible side of things, right? But obviously, the old line used to be, look at an email, and if it's poorly written, it's a sign that it's a phishing attack. But now if attackers have access to LLMs, they're crafting better emails, right? And so it can make people attack much better, right? But of course, there's also much more advanced ways that you can use AI for attacks. We're seeing things like polymorphic malware, where AI has been used to automatically update malware so that signature-based defenses no longer apply. And of course, on the defense side, DevSecOps, we're going to look at what I would say is that it's applicable on almost every part of your DevSecOps journey, right? I think there's a lot of great applications in observability, right? And of course, in the broader sense of AI, machine learning has been part of observability for a very long time, right? It's been built into many tools for a very long time. But now we can also use generative AI to get more advanced options. I'm also seeing generative AI and LLMs being used to query the vast amount of data we have about security incidents so that you can actually much more easily get to the data you need. There's a lot of applications in terms of managing that vast amount of data and looking at it in a more fruitful way that can really identify outliers, identify patterns long-term, and provide more actionable insights. I think there's some future thought, although a lot of people are hesitant to move in this direction yet, about actually taking that next step and doing automated or supervised remediation. And I've seen some very cool examples where a tool can automatically remediate, say, hey, look, we see this potential security issue. We know and here's the remediation, right? And we can apply it automatically. Now, a lot of people are hesitant to do that, and I think for good reason, right? We all have seen the very obvious mistakes that AI today can make, right? But what it can do is say, hey, operator, we see this issue, we have this remediation, and we believe that this is the right remediation with 80% probability, and give the operator that opportunity to apply it, right? So it isn't fully automated, but it is assisting, right? And beyond that, right, if they apply that same remediation, say 5 times, you can now say, no, don't ask me next time. This is one we're okay with. It's a low risk remediation. It's the same thing every time, same symptoms, same results. Please go ahead without me. And at that point, get to fully automated remediation. So, but the opportunities for AI to help in cybersecurity and DevSecOps are pretty vast. And I would just say, look at almost any component within your DevSecOps tool set, and there's opportunity where it can be applied in beneficial ways.
Thank you for answering that, Sean. Thank you for the great presentation and the knowledge you have shared with our global audience. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you. So before we conclude the webinar, Sean, would you like to give a small message to our audience?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me with EC Council. It's really my pleasure. As you can tell, I love talking about cybersecurity technology transformation, DevSecOps. I would just say thank you to our audience. I hope everybody here has gained something today, and yeah, I encourage you to continue on your DevSecOps journey, and don't hesitate to reach out if I can ever be of help.
Thank you, Sean.